The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to our Supply Chain Council webinar. For today, we are going to continue our series on the M4SC layers, and today we're going to cover the resource management layer. I know that some of the volunteers have already signed up to work on this piece, so we already have some volunteers working in this area. This will help clarify and give us some more information on this piece of the M4SC. As always, I have the question box open. Please type your questions anytime during the presentation. We'll probably have a shorter presentation today because this is a smaller piece of the system. And we are recording, so we will have this posted on the website today in a few hours. And with that brief introduction, I am going to turn this over to Casper Hunche, Research Director. Casper?
Thank you, Melinda. Welcome, everybody. So today, the fourth of the four modules or subsets of the M4SC framework, if you will. As we have shown in the last three sessions before, basically the M4SC framework consists of four key boxes. The first box talks about how you align your supply chain strategy to your business strategy, i.e., how do I translate what my supply chain goals and objectives are if I have a specific business strategy with regards to internal and external objectives. So supply chain strategy and M4SC strategy basically looks at how do I align my supply chain strategy to my business strategy. The second box, supply chain network, we talked about how you basically take the objectives for the supply chain, so the strategy, and translate that into the most optimal way to organize the supply chain itself. So the layout of the supply chain, that's what we refer to as the network. So those locations where you perform activities, how you interact with your suppliers, where your customers are, etc. So decisions about what I do where. And to some extent, what are the process capabilities that support that? So high-level practices and high-level process decisions. First make the order in locations across the network. Then the third box that we discussed was the supply chain processes, or the M4SC process layer. And basically what we said there is that once you've confirmed that you have the right layout in your network, or that there are some changes that you need to make to the layout, then you can look at what the process looks like. So where are critical processes that are impacting us from not achieving our supply chain strategic goals, and which processes do I need to modify to make sure that I can comprehend the changes to the network that I'm recommending. So the supply chain process layer really focuses at optimizing individual processes, activity within the supply chain, and through the interaction with the supply chain network activities, of course, they will not be sub-optimized, but they're part of the bigger supply chain strategy and goals. So the fourth box then takes those changes on the process layer or the processes in general and says, what are the resources that we need to put in place to make these processes happen? So this is an ongoing process of looking at the resources in your supply chain. So think about IT resources or technology resources. Think about the individuals that are performing the work, and constantly assessing whether there is a need to improve those resources, for example, through training or further development of technology, in order to make sure that you meet your strategic objectives, which go all the way back to business strategy, obviously. So today our focus is going to be on that last box, the M4SC resource layer, where we're basically trying to align our resources to the processes, to the network, to the supply chain strategy, which is then aligned to the business strategy. So our fourth layer here, resources, we'll discuss basically four key areas today. First of all, what the type of problems it is that we're trying to address with the resources layer. What are some of the major components that fit within this? And as Melinda highlighted, there are less components in the resources layer today than there are, for example, in strategy or network. So there's only 6 of those that we'll be talking about today. Some of the drivers around what influences these processes or these components, and then we'll talk a little bit more about next steps, and that we'll also look at some of the volunteering opportunities. So what are the common problems that we're trying to address with the align the resources layer? So one, of course, is that companies experience that there are many different pockets of how resource management is done. So there may not be a standardized way to look at how you manage resources. And of course, we're looking both at the staff or the skills, as well as technology assets, equipment, those kind of things. So a standardized system, if you will, for managing those resources. In other situations, what you see is that there's a one-size-fits-all. So we do have a standard model, but it's very rigid, and it doesn't actually help us for individual supply chains. So our focus is always going to be on the supply chain level where needed. Key question, of course, is how do you take strategy all the way down to execution? What is the prioritization processes that you have in place to make sure that you have resources working on the right type of issues? We, of course, always have accountability in there, managing supply chain, making sure that you have the right responsibilities and accountabilities, etc., identified is key to make sure that you effectively can execute the supply chain. And then, of course, the last one, how measurable are your processes of managing your resources? So companies may see problems in that area, and what we're trying to establish with M4SC resources is to have a system in place that not only has tasks, but also has metrics to measure how effective or successful you are. So talking about the those subcomponents, if you will, those activities within the M4SC resources layer, we've identified 6 so far. The first one is skills assessment, and this is really looking at the inventory of skills, if you will. So inventory of skills here really means what skills do the people that are currently active in my supply chain possess, and comparing those to the skills that you find required to execute the processes in your supply chain, whether it's the current processes or changes that you want to make to process. What are the needs that you have for skills? And basically, it's just like another planning process in a way, where you're comparing what do I need versus what do I currently have, so that I can come up with a list of either requirements for hiring, a list for requirements for training, or even a list of individuals that currently don't have a we don't have a need for the skills they have, or they lack too many skills for them to be successfully placed in the processes. So basically, we're trying to identify, who can do the work, what's the type of capabilities that those individuals need to have for us to have a smooth running supply chain. So that's one of the areas. The second area that we look at is standard operating procedures. It's for individuals to be able to perform the task, we have to have a system that provides them with the information of how the work is done. And so what we experience is that companies that, have a better performance, more mature approach around this, they perform better overall, because processes is not invented every time over. There is standard documentation to perform this work. So here you're trying to identify what documentation do we need, what documentation do we already have, and then where are the gaps. So where do we really need to add additional documentation? The third element is basically looking at my technology needs. So I've looked at the people side of it. Now I'm going into the technology side. Now technology really means here IT resources, so automation, but also equipment, so physical tools, etc., that people may need to perform work. And in this part, you're really looking at what are the needs that we have to optimally operate those processes, and then comparing that to the type of equipment, technology, automation that we have in place. And one thing this of course also can do is to say, companies sometimes ask themselves, so what's the value that we have actually created by putting a certain type of technology in place? Well, really that's also what you're assessing here. So what's the return of that investment that we made? Are we actually using this technology? Do we still have a need for it, etc.? So trying to identify, are we meeting the technological goals in our environment? So do we have the right technology to support those processes? We also want to look at roles and responsibilities. If you've seen the previous webinars, then you know that RACI comes back in every one of our sessions. And again, here there is a key question around who is decision maker, who is accountable, responsible, etc., for the resources in your supply chain. These are key questions that may need additional analysis, and that's really why we're putting this in the resources bucket here. So who is responsible for those specific resources and assets? It's people, technology, etc. Who can make decisions? Who's consulted in these situations? Who needs to be informed about decisions we're making? The fifth then is to look at organizational alignment. So really starting to ask the question, if we're seeing a certain set of processes in place, what's the best way to basically organize the people around it? So what are the reporting structures? Are we meeting the company business rules around how many direct reports a manager needs to have, etc.? So making sure that we're meeting the business goals or objectives for organizational design in support of operating a supply chain. And there is not necessarily a standard template that you just can pick from. So what we're trying to do with this activity is to really identify what's the right way to organize ourselves. And then the final module, if you will, is the actual aggregation of all this knowledge from this module. So basically publishing, just like in the other layers, publishing what is the plan for us. How are we going to assign resources? What changes to resources do we plan to make? I want to iterate one thing here, which is that this is not necessarily, the day-to-day, somebody walks in with an order and, I'm assigning this to an individual. That's scheduling of tasks in execution. What we're talking about here is planning to make sure that you have the right resources in place, that when that order walks in, that you can actually respond to it. So there's a key differentiation between what we're talking about here versus the day-to-day assignment of tasks to individuals. So who do I assign a work order in the production cell? That is not part of M4SC. That is really a SCOR activity. So I just want to highlight what the differences are for those that haven't seen any more details around M4SC versus SCOR. So the question, of course, is what drives this set of activities. So, of course, we know that, first of all, that the changes in a strategy layer, the net will come down through the network and the process layer, but also, of course, changes to the network or changes to process will eventually drive us to reassess how our resources are put in place. Another thing, of course, that brings it out from the right side here as an arrow, we always see that there are also events, and we call them market events, but you can call it anything, but occurrences of certain circumstances that are going to make you reassess how you've organized yourself. As an example, if you have a major labor issue going on, then you may say, well, we need to reassess what's going on. There may be a competitor that's hiring all your experts away. So that's not something that's you're going to wait for the strategy team to say, well, there's a problem, and then it comes down to this through the network and the process layer. These are events that will trigger individual tasks to take place within this aligned resources layer. So unlike in the other three, where there is also a feedback loop, so we don't really have a process layer, an M4SC layer that follows the M4SC aligned resources, so we can't really show that there is a feedback from that. Of course, we provide feedback as part of aligned resources back into the process layer, but we're trying to show on this picture just the drivers. So what's the benefits of implementing those M4SC kind of tools and techniques? First of all, it helps you periodically assess where you have gaps in skills. So one thing that we hear people talk about in supply chain a lot is, how do I deal with the hiring and maintaining the right staff, So the people component is an important element of operating a supply chain. So basically we're trying to provide you with a tool to periodically assess and make sure that you've got the right skills in place and also can identify corrective actions. Like any of the other 4 layers, we'll repeat here that we're providing roles, responsibilities, in this case around resource management. You could see that there could be a center of competency here. Don't know that I've seen it so far, but these are great questions to look into. Then of course, we also really want to reiterate with M4SC, what we're trying to establish is a set of standard processes to manage supply chain. So supply chain management, what we're trying to do with that is to say, this is how you do it. So M4SC tries to give you the building blocks that says, here are great tools and techniques to perform supply chain management, not execution, but supply chain management. And then, of course, it helps us structure our requirements towards IT. Many companies that I talked to in the past always give you some kind of indication that says, well, we have a big IT department, but I really don't think they're working on the right stuff. So for me, and that's of course the individual's perspective, but bringing all those individuals' perspectives into a structured way to drive your ongoing development is one of the key benefits of the M4SC program in general. And the idea is that we get the standard process, which will give you, predictable or reliable outcomes. So I know that if I go through these processes, I get a high quality list of activities that everybody can buy into. So the last agenda item really was what are the next steps. And so you've seen this presentation, or these slides before if you attended the previous sessions. The key question that we want to get answered is, so we have collected this information by talking to a lot of our members, the member practitioners that are really showing great capabilities in supply chain management. And we said, so what is it that you do? And so we collected that information, and we saw a lot of recurring themes and put those together as kind of the first revision of M4SC. What you're looking at, over those 4 webinars is basically the materials that we built based on what you could call M4SC Revision 1. And so the question is, if that's Revision 1, how can we get people to start using it, and also how do we get to Revision 2? And Revision 2 really needs to be where individuals, practitioners, look at the M4SC framework, share their experiences of the individual components of it, because you will find that it's like a checklist. Some of it you may do, some of it you may do differently. Some of it you may want to do, and you may actually start based on an M4SC framework, start building that capability in your organization. We'd like to learn amongst each other. Volunteering is a sharing activity. You learn from people that do better than you, and you learn from people that do worse from you. And we're trying to get more understanding around the M4SC framework components. What's the value? Where should we add certain metrics? Do you have practices or best practices, if you will, for performing this type of work? And then there's a whole bunch of questions that in the previous sessions people started bringing up. Things like, I want to understand how the resource management activities tie into risk, or vice versa. How does risk tie into resource management? Or, is there an impact of environmental objectives of my company into the resource management activities? And one key thing that always comes up is, I work in industry XYZ. We're different. So we would like to understand if there are specifics that differentiate industries. So what we're looking for as next steps is people to participate in our research work to bring in their perspective, whether it's from their industry, whether it's from their company's adoption of one or more of these modules in the past, or being in process of doing one, to look at how we could make this a even better tool. So the next couple of slides basically are going to take us through kind of the volunteering aspect. For those not familiar with Supply Chain Council, so we're non-for-profit. Our content is generated by volunteers, and those volunteers are global. I've seen some of the registrations for our M4SC program, or volunteering program, coming in the last 4 weeks or so, and they come in from all around the world. So that's very promising, because we want to understand if there's cultural differences in resource management, for example, or strategy management. Supply Chain Council uses its framework then to help or provide those to its membership, and we provide training then to support the membership in adoption. So the volunteer activities then. So we started in July with the M4SC kind of webinar series. So this is the last one that dives into the specifics of the 4 layers. So today is the 22nd. And then next week we'll start doing the volunteer plan. So if you're interested in participating, then you should register on our website as a volunteer. We've sent out several reminders in newsletters, etc. If you have any more questions, if you don't have the information that you need to register, then please contact Melinda Spring. You'll see her information on the last slide. Because we're going to go into the planning session where we're basically trying to assign the different individuals to the different sub-teams. We've identified several sub-teams, which I'll show in a couple of slides. Additional to that, in September, we will do 2 more of the M4SC trainings. So we have organized the supply chain, the M4SC strategy training in July. Got some really great feedback from the people that attended. There are some seats available for volunteers. Please contact us if you are interested in attending those. Those are really the deep dives into the individual layers of the M4SC framework. And then beyond that, in September, we start really working on the different team activities, etc. All the way up to the December event in Palm Springs, where we're getting a face-to-face, where the sub-team's going to present their first kind of findings of the work that they've done so far. And I wanted to show you this today. We haven't shown this before. Is there's basically currently 5 sub-teams that have been identified, and we kind of took the easy way out for the first 4. So we have, for each layer, we have an M4SC subject area research team. So there will be a team for strategy, network, process, and one for resources. And then the 5th one is the maturity team. And basically the purpose of that team is to look at how we can assess supply chain management maturity in a company. And of course, we believe that M4SC could be a great tool within that, and that's why we kind of slotted that in there. So we often get questions around, so how do you assess whether, where a company is in its maturity stages of managing supply chains? And so this team is looking at what it is that you would need to know, and, with our expectation that there is content in M4SC that could help structure that. Then there are 3 other existing teams that have immediately contacted us when we started talking about M4SC, because they said we would like to get M4SC as part of the conversations that we're having in our special interest groups. So these are special interest groups, so maybe not necessarily pure research teams, but special interest groups basically get together and talk about a very specific topic. And so the 3 ones that we've listed here have all indicated that they do want to understand how M4SC relates to their special interest. And that may eventually turn into a research team, or some of that content may be funneled into one of the 5 existing research teams. Of course, you can volunteer to also join one of those of the 3 existing special interest groups. So I basically talked through quite a bit of this slide already. So today we're seeing kind of the last review of the M4SC layer through the M4SC resources layer. We ask you that if you haven't done so already, that you please sign up. Keep in mind that research volunteering with Supply Chain Council is a member's benefit. So companies that have a membership, their employees are eligible to participate in our volunteer efforts. If your company is not a member, then please contact us about membership. And we also want to invite everybody, of course, to participate in the hosted event in Palm Springs, where we are bringing all the research teams together. So everybody that has the ability to travel there, please join us. It's not a requirement to be a volunteer. We do not demand that you attend. We understand that traveling from the far corners of the world, from our perspective, is not necessarily an option. We definitely do want your input. So that's what we're trying to accomplish, and that's what we want your help for. So, as a last slide, then, as promised, our contact information. So you'll find my contact email here and Melinda Springs' email for the volunteering part. Of course, please contact me if you have questions about the content. And on our website, there's also more content available. Under the resources menu, there is an M4SC set of pages that gives you links to our webinars and more materials like some of the white papers that have been written so far about it. That was me, Melinda.
Okay.
Were there any questions?
I have a really broad question from some people. And just as how is the SCOR model relating to this? How does it fit? Where is it?
Okay. So if you think about M4SC as kind of a tool set for supply chain management, and in that tool set you have, for example, if you think back into the network layer, we talked about the different decisions that you make on make to stock versus make to order. So when you do an assessment of how your supply chain is organized, you're going to look at the high-level processes. So things like a thread diagram from SCOR, training that you may have seen, that is a subset of the tool set that we're talking about. So SCOR really is kind of the structure around it. When we're talking in strategy about how you align your supply chain strategy to your business strategy, we're talking about SCOR metrics. So it's like the underlaying kind of tool that M4SC depends upon. But M4SC is not describing, what activities you do in the supply chain. You really have to go back to SCOR. As another example, we talked today about assessing your staff. So we have the people skills component in SCOR that we would expect you consider as part of doing that type of assessment. And this is kind of what the relationship is between SCOR and M4SC. So M4SC says there is a task that you need to perform from a management perspective that says periodically assess the skills, the gaps in skills that you have, etc. And SCOR in this case would be a tool that you can use to perform that task.
Okay, thanks. And then also a similar question, well, maybe not similar. And where does customer service and sales fit into this? Or does
That's an excellent question. I would expect that is something that similarly PL Core would ask itself, which is kind of the product portfolio management. So I think we don't necessarily have an answer just off the bat. There are definitely relationships, of course, because we know that, for example, when you look at strategy, that you're looking at customers and customer segmentation and product segmentation. So we know that there is definitely a linkage in there. But I think those are great questions for our research teams to have a look at.
Okay. Got a really long question here. I'm just going to read this. I haven't really, I just got it now, so I haven't. Perhaps another element to consider which might be related to organization alignment or metrics and benchmarking would be to develop guidelines around organizational productivity within given conditions of strategy, network, and process. Maybe that's a comment, more than a question.
Yeah, I would say, please join one of the teams and, let's have a detailed conversation about how we would implement that.
Right. Sounds great to be able to add to a best practice catalog and down-to-earth samples. So I think I'm just getting some nice comments here. I think, Casper, more than questions. Here's something. Change management is a critical resource for supply chain management. Where is it in the layers? Change management. Well, that's another question about how things are fitting together.
Right. And I don't want to preempt the answer that our teams would give, because I would actually expect that change management is driven from all layers. But I guess that's an excellent question again for our research teams to have a look at. How far does supply chain management extend into these type of areas?
Yeah.
Because the objective of M4SC is not to create some kind of project management approach or something. So
yeah.
But I think these are great discussion topics, and see how can we get to a consensus of how far we go and to what point we're saying this is a different discipline that isn't necessarily supply chain management. And I'm not making a statement here. I'm basically saying this is a great topic to discuss. There will be many different opinions, no doubt about that.
Right. And then here's a volunteering question about asking if we're going to be doing it online. And I don't know, do we have an answer to that yet? If we're going to be having kind of an online, I guess, virtual editing space, or you know what I mean, like a page where the teams can work virtually, since they're so global. Maybe we don't have an answer for that yet.
The answer would be yes, there has to be an online solution in place.
Yeah.
We've done that historically.
And no, we do not have the team leads ready yet or selected yet. We're still going through the, actually I've got over 100 volunteers that have already registered, and we're going through the process of checking if they're members and all of that kind of thing at this point. So exactly who's going to be the leaders of each group, we don't have that finalized yet. I've gotten a lot of questions, not only here, but also just in my general email about where else these trainings are going to take place, because obviously we want to hold them in Europe, et cetera. It's not only going to be in Houston. So there are going to be, these classes are going to be held eventually as a global offering.
Absolutely. So there is no question in my mind that we will be rolling this out globally. What you see currently is our first run of these trainings in a public session, and we've chosen a location which was the most comfortable setting for us. But we recognize that we will be doing this in Europe. We recognize we will do this in Asia, etc. but it's going to take time because we have to obviously also develop instructors that can teach this material, etc.
Right. And then I also have this question about, which you and I have already talked about, and I sent out a note to the people who were signed up by that time that those of you who are members and qualified volunteers that are asking for the materials because you're in China and you can't come to Houston, we are going to mail we can email a copy of those materials to those volunteers. So I have a question about that also.
Yeah.
I have a lot of today.
I was going to say one more thing about doing the training and getting the volunteers more up to speed. So yeah. I think we're doing some testing right now with online delivery of certain types of training. So this is not for the mainstream available yet, but once we have identified how we best can do this, then there may be some opportunities for us also to start doing some of the M4SC components, which would make it pretty much on demand.
Yeah.
But that's not today.
Right. Someone's asking for you to go back and show those dates again for the Texas training, if you can go back. So it's
10 to 14.
And it's also posted, this is also posted on the calendar on the council website.
Yeah, if you go to the training pages on the Supply Chain Council, the training schedule, you'll see the M4SC trainings listed there. You can even filter on SCOR versus M4SC training.
And I also sent out the code to the volunteers for registering for free. If you do want to attend, you can attend without the cost. And but you would only receive that from me if you were registered on the website. So.
And seating is limited.
I think that's everything I have.
Yep.
Oh, wait. And training in Latin America. Well, that'll be part of the global rollout, I would assume.
Yeah, we consider Latin America part of the world.
So yes, we will be doing that.
Yes.
Okay, that's everything I have. Casper, anything else?
No, that's all I had as well.
Okay, thank you everyone for attending. Again, this will be posted as on YouTube as well as on our M4SC webpage as a recording and also the PDF of the slides. So you can revisit it as much as you like. Thank you and good day everyone.
Thanks.